is, I'm afraid, those with whom Swapan has chosen to consort
Mani,
at this late stage in his life. So,
no, I think what's very interesting in what Mani has been saying is that he pointed out that almost inevitably every single anti-cow slaughter legislation which has been passed in the states, and Uttar Pradesh has it, Madhya Pradesh has it, Orissa has it, I mean, you name it, it's there. All of them, almost all of them, have not been passed by the BJP or its precursor, the Jana Sangh. They have always been passed by the Congress. Now the question which I think is very, very interesting is look at what the sentiment was with the Congress at that time, even when Jawaharlal Nehru, the archetypal rootless cosmopolitan, ruled the roost from Delhi. Why is it that the Congress at the grassroots, the Congress at the states, felt in a particular way, and what has happened to the Congress which now makes it possible for it to actually, for a Congress demonstration in Kerala, to oppose this, thing, to actually slaughter a cow on the streets of, where.
So Mani and Swapan.
Such an obvious answer.
Mani and Swapan, just hold on.
The obvious answer is that the Congress has changed.
Mani,
this is a very different Congress.
Swapan,
it's been taken over by Mani.
Okay. Quite wrong.
Okay,
just quite
Mani,
wrong.
if you would, just for a moment, I just wanted to say two things.
I concede the point to you because the umpire is on your side.
Mani, if you don't mind, may I
Let's
put
move beyond the cow.
Yes, if you don't mind, may I put the Bengali tigress in between? Yes, come this side. Come. Good evening, everyone. As always, in addition to Payal and me, there's Neena, Shuli, Anjali, and Ritu, who join me in welcoming all of you here today. It's a Saturday evening, so a double thank you for being here in such large numbers. We never know which day of the week to hold this on, which will suit everybody. So as you can see, we keep rotating it around. Saturday is a good day? Friday is good, okay. Well, before we start on that gladiatorial battle that Payal spoke of, I just wanted to reiterate, because we have some new guests here, we have some new members. I think Payal mentioned that we have a new partner as well, Amex, whose guests are here, and so welcome to all of you. So very briefly, I just wanted to say a couple of words about algebra, because over the speakers table, Mani just asked me that, why have you called this club algebra? Well, it means, as many of you know, the science of restoration and balance. And we have also got the insignia of the dragonfly, which is a symbol of emotional and intellectual transformation. And those are the kinds of conversations that we have sought to bring to you. I'm not exactly sure how much that science of restoration of balance is going to kick in this evening, but I hope it will. Because the first session really is about a very fractious, often very bitter conversation in our public life. And that fractious conversation overtakes everything else of national concern. The loss of jobs, the jobless growth, the running out of water, the farmer crisis, the Dalit crisis, sewage workers. You can think of innumerable things that should really preoccupy us. But the one conversation that does preoccupy us is, who are we as Indians? And perhaps it is befitting that conversation holds the kind of central position it does, because as a nation and as a democracy, the idea, the narrative that we agree to abide by is really what will define us as a country and as a people, and everything else flows from that. So this fractious conversation really has two sides to it. At the one side, ever since 2014, it has of course increased and escalated and intensified. There is one half of India, or one segment of India, that feels that India, despite being a majority Hindu nation, in eschewing Hindu chauvinism, is also begun to eschew Hinduism altogether. And so we are accused of being rootless cosmopolitans, secularists, libtards, secularists, all of that. On the flip side, there is a sense that we had agreed in 1947 to be a modern, secular, plural democracy. And now there is a dispensation that, given its free hand, would turn this country into a Hindu Rashtra. And that its founding ideology lies with men like Golwalkar, who believed that territorial nationalism was unscientific, lifeless, and just for those who don't know what territorial nationalism means, it means that you confer equal rights to everybody that lives within a certain territory that you have agreed as a nation. So that really is the heart of the argument, that what kind of a nation are we? Over the past few weeks, that larger conversation got crystallized into a wonderful debate between two of its most eloquent combatants, and they are the ones who are going to take the stage today. When the spate of cow lynchings was happening, there was a rally that a lot of people came together for, which said, "Not in my name," that these killings can't be done in my name. At which point, Swapan Dasgupta, who, as I said, is one of the most, the sort of forerunners of intellectual sort of arsenal of the BJP, wrote a column in which he said that this resistance to cow slaughter and the ban on cow slaughter really arose out of rootless cosmopolitanism, and that it had social sanction, and that of course violence was wrong, but that we Macaulay Putras, who are secularists, were misunderstanding the mood of the nation and the popular symbolism that really defines, the Hindu symbolism that defines popular culture in India today. To which Sankar Aiyer, who is his old friend and combatant, wrote another column in which he reminded Swapan that he was very much part of this Macaulay Putra axis, and that he used to write columns on creme brulee, and that he and that he, of course, has been educated in St. Stephen's and Oxford, and that at one time he had similar humanist values as we assume that liberals bat for. So to really go beyond the television fight, beyond just the combating columns, I'd love to invite both these, who in many ways really represent the intellectual extremities of this argument, and we hope that we will arrive at a deeper understanding of what is really at stake beyond just a battle of smart words. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome two great intellectuals of this country, and let's hope that they give us great insight today. Swapan Dasgupta and Sankar Aiyer. The difference of in a modern day gladiatorial battle is that you place the two of them together without a tiger in between. And of course, the moment I saw Swapan, I told Mani that he'd lost the first arrow in his quiver, because in the column, Mani Shankar reminded Swapan that Mani is always dressed in a kurta and pajama, whereas Swapan is usually in the colonial, trouser and shirt. So Swapan has come well armed for battle. Because you can see he's sartorially correct today. So anyway, Swapan, let me start with you. As I said, this whole larger civilizational debate has got crystallized to a certain extent in the arguments and in the rhetoric and the actual killings that have arisen around cow slaughter. When you wrote in your column that those who invoke the Constitution against the ban on cow slaughter are really behaving against a common decency, because there is huge social sanction for this ban, and that it really is the mood of a large majority in this country, and that one should abide by that. And of course, you wrote against the violence, but you said the larger ban on cow slaughter should be upheld. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is that when you speak of social sanction, Swapan, can a modern democracy really only go by social sanction? In the past, there was social sanction for sati, or there was social sanction for child marriage. One did reform those things and to arrive at a more egalitarian understanding of a polity. So is this really the core reason why you think cow slaughter should be banned, that it has social sanction?
Well, just as a matter of information, Shoma, cow slaughter is banned. I think what we're talking about is not really cow slaughter, but we're talking about a certain type of vigilantism which has accompanied this, and I think we should be very clear in our mind. Okay, you know, this debate, which you began in your introduction, very erudite introduction, didn't really start.
I can immediately feel the arrow in that, you know. I feel the wound, Swapan.
Erudite, and where you left no doubt where your sympathies lay, didn't begin in 2014.
Sorry, will you just speak into the...
It didn't begin in 2014. It predated it. It's a debate, it's a conversation, to use some of the more trendier lexicon. It's a conversation which has been going on for much of the 20th century, and in fact predated that in some respects, and I think Mani would agree with me on that. The issue of cow slaughter is quite interesting if we are just talking about that. Cow slaughter, or opposition to cow slaughter, was very much a part of the nationalist movement all over Uttar Pradesh, all over, very much a part of, at least central India, if you might call it that. Gaurakshani Sabhas and the Congress were hand in glove. That was part of your nationalism. It is part of the directive principles of the Indian Constitution. Now you might say, and a lot of us might say, that look, food freedom should be absolute. It's also a prescription which we can apply to alcohol. Why should we take on Gandhiji's notion of absolute prohibition and put that into the directive principles of this? And by and large, we don't follow it, except a few states. By and large, it's not adhered to. I think cow slaughter is beef is one of those very touchy issues in India. I've seen in personal experience, it sharply divides people. At what you put on your plate, whether you slaughter a cow, it can cause a great deal of polarization and give offense to a large number of people. Now, giving offense willfully to many people is, to my mind, something which society should not encourage. However libertarian we may be, there are certain prescriptions, and I use the word common decencies. It's not a very original term. It's actually borrowed from a British philosopher called Roger Scruton, who talked about how society is actually bound by this notion of what is called common decencies, where this is a code which society adheres to. When that code breaks down, there are social tensions. We are finding this in Europe all the time, how different go. And I think this is a classic example of why it is necessary for the modernists, for the libertarians, to be a little more accommodative. I'm not saying that they shouldn't eat beef, but I would strongly suggest, both for the reasons of aesthetics, taste, and otherwise, that they take the flight out of Indira Gandhi International Airport and have their steak there.
Well, Swapan, you know, I mean, there are many riposts to that, but I'm going to bring money into the conversation. When you say they should take the flight to Indira Gandhi and have their beef outside and have their steak outside, the impact of this really is that it affects innumerable Dalits who cannot take the flight out of Indira Gandhi Airport, as well as Muslims. And then just to remind you that when we are speaking about many people being offended by this, it's true. And, you know, there must definitely be the possibility that people should not be, you know, will not eat beef themselves, but will allow it for others, because even at this point, Kerala allows it, the northeastern states allow it, because it is fairly practiced in those communities for people to eat beef. So the same way that you live and let live in that way, why not those in UP or Bihar who eat beef should be allowed to eat beef, whereas those who don't eat beef restrain themselves. You know, so this advice
No,
that
just,
go out of the
just,
country is a bit
I
problematic.
won't take up too much time because I think Mani should have its say. When you talk about beef, and I think this is a classic Indianism, we actually don't only mean cow meat. In India, we also include the buffalo as part of beef. When people talk about Indian exports of beef, the volumes come from buffalo exports. So there is no prescription which makes it obligatory for anyone who's either a Christian, Muslim, or any other faith to actually have beef by
Sure.
obligation.
So
it's not part of their faith is not going to be eroded.
Sure. Swapan, in fact, I'm glad that you said that, because I think that it's a pity that this entire argument has got framed as a matter of faith, because for many people it's a matter of economic necessity, you know, that they eat something cheaper, and there's a whole economy around it. But let's move away from that. The question I'd actually asked you was whether social sanction should be the key parameter of something in a modern civil democracy. But I'm going to come back to you on that. Mani, what is your response to what Swapan is saying, which is that this is a sentiment amongst people and that the liberals as well as others should be more accommodative of it? And he had accused you as well as that entire spectrum of being rootless cosmopolitans for not understanding this emotion. What do you say about that?
My first response would be to you. I hope we can get away from the cow quickly to the subject for which we've all been called. But as you raise the cow, let me respond to him by saying I completely agree with him that the issue is not cow slaughter. In his first sentence, he said the issue is vigilantism over cow slaughter. That is what is troubling us. Insofar as the issue of cow slaughter is concerned, I think the definitive answer was given by Mahatma Gandhi, who at the end of July, I think it's the 25th of July, 1947, was asked what his view was. And Gandhiji replied that as a believing Hindu, I will not eat cow meat ever. But I believe that the decision on what one should eat or not eat is a decision that should be left voluntarily to an individual. And that if we attempt to impose this on others against their volition, that would be wrong. And subsequently, Jawaharlal Nehru had a pitched battle with Ramakrishna Dalmia in the 2 weeks leading to independence on precisely this issue. And his argument was that there are a number of economic arguments for scientific animal husbandry. And therefore, if you want to take cow slaughter in that context, one can consider it. But to ban cow slaughter only on the grounds of the religious sentiment of a majority of the majority would not be appropriate. And inevitably, therefore, in the Constitution, he's absolutely right that there is a reference to, cows. I'm not sure that comes out as cow slaughter. But in the directive principles of state policy, in the section relating to animal husbandry, and generally looking after our cattle populations, it says that this subject may be looked at by the states, and it adds that this whole issue is a matter for state governments. And it was Congress state governments in, I think, about 15 states, that brought about the ban on cow slaughter, but not on eating beef. And certainly it didn't give license until 2014, the state, to taking the law into your own hands and even killing people on the suspicion that there is some beef stored in their refrigerator or that they are carrying cattle to be slaughtered. And now we find that there are stories spreading right across our newspapers which tell us of what is to be done with cows that have ceased to be milch cattle. What is to be done with them? And because this was the question that Nehru felt should be answered in totality before you imposed a ban on cow slaughter, I think that argument has not been resolved so far. And we have instances of of mob behavior and lynching, which are occasionally objected to by the Prime Minister, generally from some lofty rampart. But it is not congressmen who are murdering these people. Yes, I'm afraid those with whom Swapan has chosen to consort
Mani,
at
will you
this
speak
late
into
stage in his life. So,
No, I think what's very interesting in what Mani has been saying is that he pointed out that almost inevitably every single anti-cow slaughter legislation which has been passed in the states, and Uttar Pradesh has it, Madhya Pradesh has it, Orissa has it, I mean, you name it, it's there. All of them, almost all of them, have not been passed by the BJP or its precursor, the Janasangh. They have always been passed by the Congress. Now the question which I think is very, very interesting is look at what the sentiment was with the Congress at that time, even when Jawaharlal Nehru, the archetypal rootless cosmopolitan, ruled the roost from Delhi. Why is it that the Congress at the grassroots, the Congress at the states, felt in a particular way, and what has happened to the Congress which now makes it possible for it to actually, for a Congress demonstration in Kerala, to oppose this, or thing, to actually slaughter a cow on the streets of, where.
So
there's
Mani
such a-
and
there's
Swapan.
such an obvious answer.
Mani and
obvious
Swapan, just
answer-
hold on. May
the
I
obvious
just...
answer is that
such
the
an
Congress has
obvious
changed.
answer.
Mani,
This
I
is a
have...
very different Congress.
Swapan
It's been
and
taken
Mani,
over by
just-
money.
Okay.
Quite wrong.
Okay,
It's
just
quite
Mani,
wrong.
if you would, just for a moment, I just
All right,
wanted to say two
I
things.
concede the point to you because the umpire is on your side.
Mani, if you don't mind, may I
Let's
put the...
move beyond the cow.
Yes, if you don't mind, may I put the Bengali tigress in between? Yes, come this side.
We all go together.
Come. This is the surprise of India. Two things I'd like to point out before we move further is that this is the beauty of algebra, that I put the two men together and they're beginning to agree, and they suddenly realize they don't have an argument over cow slaughter, which is wonderful. And that's the surprise of India, that, you constantly find, oh, we actually agree on things that we thought we disagreed on. But let me, the reason I did that was because I need to physically separate both your affections for each other, So, Swapan, just to...
It's completely illegal.
Illegal. Well, not after that privacy judgment. I just wanted to get into this larger conversation about rootless cosmopolitans. What did you really mean by that, Swapan? When you call Nehru a rootless cosmopolitan, I think that that's a patently ill-advised attribute to give Nehru, because anyone who's read Discovery of India will see his great love for the traditions and heritage of this country and his great familiarity with it. So when you say rootless cosmopolitanism, what do you mean by that?
Well,
Describe Mani and others.
Firstly, it's a lovely phrase. And when you write in journalism, you always look for the catchy phrase. And I think it was one phrase which I knew would offend a lot of people. And it succeeded in that. Nehru doesn't really fit into the idea of rootless cosmopolitan. Nehru was, to my mind, a person who was deeply ambivalent, who was, at one level, emotionally a Westerner, who was politically, who had to battle within India. Therefore, he straddled both the worlds, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The title Discovery of India is also very revealing, because it suggests that he was there to discover India. He wasn't off it, it was something there. Discovery of America, Columbus. So that was Nehru. When Nehru...
Swapan, you're relying on people not having read Discovery of India and the great emotion and regard that runs through it. So that's a cheap shot.
When Chandigarh, the city of Chandigarh was created, Nehru made a very interesting speech there, I'm sorry I don't have the exact verbatim copy, but I'll more or less give you the summary. And he said, I'm so glad that Corbusier actually took no inspiration from anything else. That he began, and it was a completely new experience. It would have been horrible, he said, if any of the old architecture of Punjab had actually been brought into Chandigarh. Because it was necessary to eradicate the old so that we must build the new. And I think that, to my mind, often summed up Nehru's thing. That he had this notion of a brave new world which he was going to create. It's a noble endeavor, no doubt. That it didn't succeed was because it was India.
Do you think,
And because it was Indians.
Swapan, if I may bring money into this, and just two things before that. One is that now Mr. Modi also wants a new India. So do you think he's in the Nehruvian mold? That's one question. Secondly, it's fascinating because we had Subramaniam Swamy here as well, and he's also an intellectual of, who represents the BJP idea as well as the RSS idea.
He represented himself.
Okay. But interestingly, like you, he said a lot of the things that he says in public is really only to get a rise out of people and because it sounds good and interesting. Is that really the depth of the intellectual dissent that you have against the cosmopolitans? Well, let me bring money into this. Money, Swapan just spoke of how Nehru wanted to erase the past and create a new language, a new vocabulary for what this country would be. One, do you think that that's a fair assessment of Nehru? And secondly, I think there is a legitimate grievance that people do feel, which is that in eschewing Hindu chauvinism, as I said, that in a way, many generations, certainly a lot of us who grew up in convent schools and in English education schools, were cut off from our heritage completely. We didn't read Tulsi Das, we didn't read Kali Das, we knew nothing about Wajid Ali Shah, we knew nothing about the Adbhut Ramayan. So did successive Congress governments in fact play a role in cutting off a people from its own creative cultural heritage?
I'm absolutely sure that Swapan has read The Discovery of India. You confirm that? It is a paean of praise to the story of India. It's a paean of praise to Indians. It goes back to the most ancient times. And from there it traces the evolution of a unique civilization that was open to every influence that came from outside. But while it was open, it had a solid core and therefore could absorb, assimilate, synthesize without losing its essence. The discovery of India is not a geographical discovery of India. It's neither Columbus, who incidentally went west, and nor is it Vasco da Gama, who came this side. He's not talking of that kind of a discovery of India. He's trying to discover the India in contradistinction to the India that was being put forward by Chopin's mentors, who go back to Savarkar, who begged and pleaded with the British to please bring me out of jail, and I am the most loyal servant that you have. It belongs to M.S. Golwalkar, who said and then denied that his model was Hitler, and who built up the RSS on the model of the Nazi SS. Then it was the model of what happened subsequently when Hedgewar and others got together and created an ethos in which Gandhi was assassinated. And today, the BJP has revealed its true colors when Advani puts up, when he is Deputy Prime Minister, the portrait of Savarkar immediately opposite that of Gandhi, so that the guy can continue to take aim. The fact of the matter is that Savarkar and his followers put forward the idea of an India that was a Hindu India. So much so that he abuses Ashoka, and Golwalkar follows it up, by saying that this doctrine of non-violence is the worst thing that ever happened to India. And they go on to celebrate hatred, envy. It's on this basis that he produces a vision of India as one which has to be based on not only love of the fatherland, which is India, but also which regards India as the Holy Land, which means anybody who looks towards Makkah or who looks towards Jerusalem is automatically not Indian. It was against this distorted vision of India as a Hindu country, as distinct from an India that was capable of meeting all the cultural and religious onslaughts that came, and yet remaining itself, and becoming the one example of how neither antiquity nor is it continuity that defines India's civilization, but heterogeneity. And to prove this, chapter 3 of the Discovery of India, which again I'm sure he's read, has Nehru during the 1937 election go from place to place asking people to vote for the Congress in what words? He says to them that you're receiving me by saying Bharat Mata ki Jai, which now they've appropriated. He says, you coming and saying Bharat Mata ki Jai, but what is this Bharat Mata? Is it the mountains? Is it the grass? Is it the trees? Is it the leaves? And then he answers his own question, saying they look bewildered because they thought they understood what Bharat Mata was. And he says, Bharat Mata is you, whether you're a Hindu, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're dark, whether you're fair. And that is why it seems to me today, if you'll give me another few minutes, it seems to me today that when we are asking the question for which we've been called, which is not how this introduction has gone, as to why, I ask you now that question. Why are you, what is an Indian? And I'll give you my provisional answer. An Indian is one who doesn't understand another Indian when he opens his mouth. An Indian is one who is not understood when he opens his mouth. An Indian is one who does not belong to the same race as another Indian. An Indian is one whose color is not the same as that of another Indian. An Indian is one whose language is not the same as that of another Indian. An Indian is one whose food is not the same as another Indian. Try and make a Madrasi eat Wazwan, or try and get a Kashmiri to eat Sambar. In the same way, an Indian is one whose clothes are not the same as another Indian. An Indian is one whose dance is not the same, whose singing is not the same, whose music is not the same. Then what is an Indian? And my provisional answer to my own question is, an Indian is one who accepts that anyone else who calls himself an Indian is an Indian.
Well, I think what's very interesting is the definition of monies, which is that India is defined as mutual incomprehension. To my mind, you take the easy way out by locating the extreme examples of Golwalkar and Savarkar. The origin of India as a deity actually goes back much, much before that. You may not have heard, because of linguistic incomprehension, of a gentleman called Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. He was incidentally the author of a song which now you've disavowed, called Vande Mataram. And there, the imagery of the mother is very much there. And that song was the motto on which the Congress and the entire national movement was there. Vande Mataram, I bow to the mother. So the idea of India as a deity, as the Punya Bhumi, as the mother goddess, was very much implanted in the entire discourse, much before you talk about Savarkar or anything like that. Where Savarkar and others, what they did was they added another dimension which can be disputed, and I have no hesitation in disputing them all. Savarkar was very partial. the idea of the Punya Bhumi in particular is extremely problematic. However, I think what is important is, as you mentioned, what the discovery of India talks about is that the cultural unity of India is something which is there. It's very visible. It's something which links Kashmir to Kanyakumari. Why is it that the priests of the Amarnath cave, the Shivling in the Amarnath, is a Nambudri Brahmin from Kerala? Why is it? It's not because there is a mutual incomprehension. It's not because they prefer a veshti to the dhoti. It is because there is a certain India, to use the words of Diana Eck, is something also which is there, a sacred geography. And if you don't acknowledge that there is another dimension to India which goes beyond the Western type of nationalism, then you'll have a very limited vision, and which is why you find it easy to talk about this incomprehension. I don't understand you, and we understand each other just because we went to the same college.
No, Swapan and Mani, if I may just intervene here. Only one thing I'd like to point out, Swapan, about what Mani said, and then I'm going to actually challenge both of you on the betrayals of both your sides, is that he did not only speak of the mutual incomprehension, he spoke of the underlayer of acceptance that lies below that incomprehension.
Precisely what I'm talking about.
Yes, but so that acceptance is very much there, and it is that, you know, whoever calls himself as Indian is a language of acceptance, not of incomprehension.
I don't think anyone should object to anyone saying Vande Mataram, just as you shouldn't object to anyone saying Bharat Mata Ki Jai, which you yourself said, those were our slogans, they stole it. There's nothing wrong in stealing it.
Sure,
they were the consensual
Please
slogans.
give me an opportunity.
They were the
Please,
consensual slogans.
I really plead with you, because otherwise your question may divert us from his argument. I want to warm the cockles of Swapan Dasgupta's Bengali heart by informing him of what he obviously doesn't know, that at every single Congress meeting, Vande Mataram is sung.
I'm very glad of that.
I want to stress that. Equally, the Congress has always been pleased to agree that at every beginning of a parliamentary session, we will hear the tune of Jana Gana Mana, and at the end, we will always hear, provided the BJP are sitting in their seats, they're usually disrupting the proceeding, they'll hear the tune of Vande Mataram. I do not see any contradiction there. But at the same time, we are also aware of the fact that another Bengali started the Azad Hind Fauj. He didn't start the Swatantra Bharat Sena. He is the one who gave the slogan that we adopted, although we didn't agree with his philosophy entirely, of Jai Hind. There is a whole variety of ways in which we can express our loyalty to this country, our love for this country, our pride in this country. It is not limited to picking up some stanzas from a poem. I think that poem is a wonderful poem. I also think Sare Jahan Se Acha, Hindustan Hamara, is a great piece of poetry. And it's a highly loyal thing, despite the fact that Muhammad Iqbal was the one who first propagated, even before 1940, the idea of Pakistan as a separate country. So in these circumstances, it is in enveloping everything in India that can make us proud. The fact that we are the second largest Muslim country in the world, it makes me proud. That we are the first Christian country in the world, that makes me proud. That we have dissidents from Hinduism, like the Sikhs, like the Buddhists, like the Jains, that they were all born in this country. And that when Shankaracharya, regarding whom there are paeans of praise in Nehru's discovery of India, went to open the mutt at Badrinath, at least in legend, and that has been preserved over time. So who is objecting to a Nambudri going to Garhwal? I have no objection to that. Let us just have respect for everything that India stands for, and not Yogi Adityanath saying that the Taj Mahal is not part of India's culture.
Yes.
He's actually said that.
Swapan, you know everything that Mani is saying, and you said in the beginning that I show my predilection. I actually don't have a predilection between both your parties because I don't like both your leaders right now. But I think the predilection is to this inclusive plurality, whereas the BJP, even in its modern day avatar, which is led by Mr. Modi and this desire for new India, speaks of a Hindu Rashtra. We have a president today who has said that Islam and Christianity are not part of India's heritage. So those things are, yes, but he has spoken.
He has not said it. Please do not put words in.
Yes, but
he has not said it.
He has spoken of Islam and Christianity as not being part of the Hindu heritage of this country, and yet we keep arguing that the Hinduness that you all speak of is a geographical construct and it's not a religious construct, a civilization. So anyway, I was going to say that I want to ask both of you about your betrayals. In the same column that really triggered us inviting both of you here, you said that there is a lot of discomfort amongst the seculars and the libtards or whatever the abusive terms for cosmopolitans are, that there is a great amount of discomfort with the BJP and its Hindu trappings. Now, I'd love you to expand on that, Swapan. What makes you think that those who perhaps don't live by the BJP ideology are uncomfortable with the Hinduness of anybody, So the question I want to ask you is that when you have people in your spectrum of, your political spectrum who speak not of Aryabhatta, who don't speak of Yajnavalkya, but who speak of Gandhari giving a piece of flesh and then that becoming 100 sons as proof of the fact that there was test tube babies in the past. Or speak of the Pushpa Viman as proof that we were the real inventors of, of aeroplanes. Or who speak of Ganesha's head and his nose as proof that India practiced plastic surgery 5,000 years ago. Do you not think that in many ways we are mutilating the richness of our past, the actual richness of our past, by putting forward these kind of untenable interpretations of rich myths? So are you and your ilk really betraying the Hindu heritage by these kind of simplistic enunciations?
If you believe that metaphor ought to be taken literally, then you may as well join those people.
I don't believe that, but Mr. Dinanath Batra does.
Mr. Dinanath Batra is entitled to a lot of beliefs. Mani Shankar Aiyer believes that he is a, secular fundamentalist. Exactly. The others in the Congress party don't necessarily believe in it. So Dinanath Batra may believe in it, but it's certainly not consensual wisdom. It is certainly not something which I would have any truck with. And I hope that it's not something which anyone in India will take serious note to. P.N. Oak used to write Taj Mahal as a Hindu palace long ago. I saw it when I was a school student. And there are still, that theory gets touted around every now and then. That's not the issue. The basic point here is that there is a heritage of India. That heritage which Mani spoke about, which the discovery of India also acknowledges, is, for the want of any other shorthand, I would say, a fundamental bedrock of Hindu civilization, which defines that India. No one can deny it. That is not to necessarily say that there have been no other influences on that. And we cannot deny those influences. Today, Amish is sitting here. Amish has very generously reinterpreted the epics to suit his contemporary tastes. And he's been very successful in doing that. Am I going to accuse Amish of heresy, blasphemy? Or am I going to say that he is one person who's actually enriched our understanding of it? When A.R. Rahman did that Vande Mataram in 1997, should I accuse him of massacring Bankim Chandra Chatterjee? Or taking it to another plane? There was a very interesting debate which took place, and I was mentioning it to Mani just before when we were there, between Dayanand Saraswati and the Pandits of Banaras. And Dayanand Saraswati suggested that the Vedas constitute the be-all and end-all of everything. Whereas the Pandits of Banaras, who you would probably expect to be more obscurantist, of, bigoted, etc., suggested that yes, the Vedas do constitute a knowledge, but what is not in the Vedas cannot be dismissed. That constitutes the parampara, is often defined by that.
But Swapan,
And therefore, that is really what is Hinduism, at least the Hindu inheritance. I hate you using the word Hinduism. The Hindu inheritance, as I understand it, actually means that sense of openness, but also an unabashed acknowledgement that it is the Hindu inheritance. That you cannot be squeamish about it and say, no, this is some syncretic culture which has come about. There may be a lot of layers in India, but to deny that importance. And why is it that there is a certain
Swapan,
sneer?
No, but Swapan,
why is it there is a certain sneer in the minds, in the faces of a lot of people when I use the word Hindu? Why?
Swapan,
Why is it?
may
Why
I-
is it necessary to be acknowledged? So, in other words, you're giving succor to people loonies like Dinanath Batra, who talk rot.
But Swapan, may I just intervene here, that it is fascinating that everything you're saying and everything Mani is saying is actually in consonance. I don't think anybody has any argument with the description of the Hindu inheritance that you spoke of. My question to you is, then why are your columns writing with the sneer that you're imagining is on our faces? Because when you speak of the Hindu trappings of the BJP, we have no quarrel with the Hindu trappings of the BJP if this is the inheritance that you're speaking of. But it has also survived 5,000 years without it being thrust down people's throats. Why is it that today we must thrust it down people's throats?
Because
It exists. It is there. Nobody is denying it. Why is your entire politics?
There is a
Swapan,
fundamental
if I may
force.
just-
No, no,
if I may just finish my question, that why is your politics built on the desire to articulate this as a dominance over others? It exists. It is there in our lived reality every given day and every given moment. And the second question is that when Mr. Subramaniam Swamy came here, much like what you're saying, Swapan, that you agree with this. And so everyone that you're saying are cosmopolitans, are seculars, actually love this inheritance that you're speaking of. But he said the only reason we want to push it down people's throats and make them admit that all Muslims were Hindus before they became Muslims is because we want to consolidate the vote. Are you today telling me that what you're saying on stage is in consonance with everything that I think Mani feels, or I feel, not as the Congress party, but as lovers of this inheritance we all live by? There's no argument. So then why do you want to thrust it down people's throats?
So, Shoma, I'm glad you talk for all the secularists.
No, I don't. I said
You
for
said
me and him.
Look, there is a fault line. There is a major fault line. One is the political, one party political, which we can, it's not very significant. I mean, that sort of, every 5 years we can go to the hustings and decide on that. I think there is another one, which is, what is nationhood? Is our nationhood cultural, which is what I believe it is? Or is our nationhood, as some of the extreme secularists believe, built exclusively on the Constitution? What they call constitutional patriotism. What does that mean? It's a term which is derived from Germany after 1945, when the Germans felt that they must turn their backs on their prehistory because it was, it was pretty gory, and there were sort of dodgy aspects to it. So they came on this called constitutional patriotism, by which it says that everything which is defined in India is defined by the Constitution. It is not. The Constitution is are the rules of the game. It's the rules of how we conduct business on a day-to-day basis, how the public life is conducted. But how our nation is defined is something far deeper. And it is that which I think is very important to acknowledge. And I think that's where the real disagreement stems from. The disagreement stems is you do not attach too much importance to what we call the cultural roots of nationhood. And instead, you take too much in the idea of what is called the constitutional patriotism, whereby you just say, we swear by the Constitution. Of course you swear by the Constitution. If you play cricket, you swear by the rules of the game, the laws of cricket as they call it. But there is something deeper in cricket also.
I'm going to bring Mani into that. Before that, Mani, if you would cast light on what you think is nationhood. He said there's a distinction between those who believe that the constitution defines nationhood and those who believe that there's a cultural definition of nationhood, which really draws from the Hindu inheritance. So I'm going to bring you in on that. But before that, Swapan, because these terms are so loose, will you define what you mean when you say that there is a cultural definition of the nation which is not encompassed by the constitution? What is that definition? When you said that there is a cultural definition of the nation which is not encompassed by the constitution, what do you mean by that? Would you define what you mean by nation?
The constitution does not necessarily talk about the civilizational aspect. It's not its business to talk about the civilizational aspect. The constitution talks about laws, it talks about how we conduct our business, what's the relationship between the legislature and the executive, what's the powers of the judiciary, etc. That's what it is. If
No, so
is India going to be a contrived, manufactured nation which lives only by this? If not, if India is to be something much more deeper, something which probably reflects what Nehru may have meant in discovery of India.
You started by discrediting Nehru.
No,
so
I'm talking about the use of the word discovery of India. If that is what it is, you see, Tagore, for example, had a certain belief. He disavowed nationalism. And it was and Tagore, mind you, that was not the last word. Tagore was challenged at every point in Bengal at that point and saying, what is it? Why are you disavowing nationalism? Tagore hated Gandhi for his non-cooperation movement in 21. He thought a monster had been unleashed in India. Did Tagore, but at the same time, Gandhiji called him an epitome of nationalism.
Sure. Swapan,
so the whole point is that constitution represents only part of the Indian existence. The rest of the Indian existence comes from what we feel about India, our sense of inheritance, where there can be room for debate about what exactly you feel. But just because I do not necessarily agree with your sense of what our inheritance is, you should not look down on my sense of what I consider my inheritance. And it's that openness which is there. It is not that sense of condescension which the liberals in India have towards anyone who they feel represent the vernacular, who represent the provincial, who represent the others. It is that condescension which really has marked what the secular intervention has been. And this is why, this is something incidentally which Mani, your party people themselves privately also admit to. That it is that there is another nationalism which is more indigenous, which is far more rooted, which is far more vernacular, if you might call it. That is what...
Swapan, I'm going to bring Mani into this. Mani, please speak of what he's saying, that there is a cultural nationalism that exists. Before that, Swapan, I just want to pin you down on a couple of things because it's I'm sorry, I really did mean to sit in the center, but there are a couple of things when you say that there's a sneer that people feel, there's a condescension that people feel. Swapan, how are you assessing or measuring the emotions of an entire group of people who you call the secularists or the liberals? You're speaking in such intangible terms, condescension, sneering. There is none. This is the lived reality. But now, Mani, sorry.
Of course there is. When you say that temple should be made into a public toilet.
Okay, Mani, what do you feel about what he said, that the constitution doesn't encompass everything?
Let me begin by saying that I am 100% in agreement with Swapan that Hinduism is the bedrock of our culture and civilization. The difference between him and me is that I take this for granted. He's trying to prove it. Now, I don't see that necessarily. As someone who was born into a Hindu family, I was taught the first verse of the Rig Veda. That verse, which I have to paraphrase because I don't have it in my memory or here, is who created this world, is how it begins. It describes nature and then says who created all this. And the answer it gives is, only he knows. And then the punchline is, and perhaps even he knows not. This skepticism is the fundamental feature of our national character. We are argumentative, which means that we accept the plurality of opinions as much as diversity in every other aspect. And therefore, we keep looking for answers, and we don't expect to arrive ever at a final conclusion. Every conclusion is provisional, and something else will come on. Now, if the fact of the matter isn't, everyone knows this, is not a secret, that the greatest Hindu of the 20th century was Mahatma Gandhi. His favorite pupil was Jawaharlal Nehru, whom he described as a perfect nationalist. And he described him as a perfect nationalist because while Nehru was bubbling with pride at our Hindu inheritance, he recognized that there came something of an intellectual shock in the 7th century AD, when first the Buddha, and before that, at about the same time, Mahavira, started asking fundamental questions of the ritualism to which Hinduism had come. And then as a result of those revolutionary ideas, and Nehru did say that if he weren't an atheist, the only religion he would really subscribe to would be Buddhism, because the Buddha refused to ask or answer the question as to what is God. He believed in religion as right behavior. And historically, politically speaking, from Ashoka, about 300 and something years before before Jesus Christ, and up to Harshvardhan of Kannauj in the 8th century AD, for about 1,000 years, the state religion of northern India was largely Buddhist, except during the Gupta period, and in southern India, it was largely Jain. So these are not layers. They are woven into the warp and the woof of the evolution of Indian civilization. And we had this great influence of the Kushans. And we were the only ones who didn't imitate what was being done in Greece or Rome. We took up their art, their techniques, and converted them into Indian figures. And that is why we have this great heritage of Takshila that Mr. Modi thinks is in India, but which I'm sure Swapan can inform him is actually in Pakistan.
So
Then we had, you can't interrupt me in Indian history at this point. I've only come to Kannauj. After that, we had the arrival of Arab traders in Kerala in the same century as the Prophet in the Arab world. And then Muhammad bin Qasim comes to India in 712 AD. Now you're looking very impatient, so I'll stop my...
Mani, the only reason...
Few centuries
I want
left.
to emphasize, all right,
Yeah.
try. For 666 years, from Muhammad Ghori coming on the throne of Delhi in 1192 till 1858, when Bahadur Shah Zafar was dethroned, for 666 years, we had Muslim sultans or badshahs on the throne of Delhi. And when the British undertook their first census in India, it turned out that only 24% of Indians were Muslims. This shows that not only do we absorb what others bring in, we also influence them very greatly. The Syrian Christian church is such an old Christian church that they would be justified in regarding the Pope as a Protestant. This is the pride of India. These are all the layers, and they've all got interwoven with our Hindu heritage, which is undeniable. And the difference between those whom he is now disavowing, the Savarkar lot, and going back apparently to Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who had a good novel with lots of nice songs in it, one of the earliest musicals, and that contained some vicious anti-Muslim stuff, along with a huge amount of Indian nationalism. And therefore, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee is part of even the Congress heritage as shown by what we do with the Vande Mataram. Nehru was a great admirer of Swami Vivekananda. And the Hinduism of Swami Vivekananda was not the Hinduism of Dayanand Saraswati or of Narendra Modi over today. So the only difference between him and me is that we both recognize that India is a composite of numerous cultures and religions. It's a composite. He wants to somehow accept that it is a composite, but because Hinduism is the bedrock, that is authentic India. The rest of it is sort of layers which are undesirable but have to be accepted because they are part of our history and population. I am saying, let us please celebrate the diversity of India and not try and reduce that diversity by saying, accept that you're a Hindu first. 15% of Indians can't. I may be a secular fundamentalist, but I was a Hindu. I was brought up as a Hindu. Swapan is a Hampstead Hindu. All his inspiration comes from the West and comes from Neeraj Chaudhary, as I've discovered over years of battling with him. But I am willing to accept that even Swapan Dasgupta is an Indian, and I respect him for it.
You see, I think what's remarkable about it is, and Mani is quite right in talking about the absence of certitude as being part of Indian culture. And I think that absence of certitude is something which is ingrained into what we call the Hindu inheritance. Partly because there is, in terms of rituals, whether in terms of philosophies or things, very little commonality and sharp differences which are celebrated. Mani also talked about the fact that there are not various layers, that there are various other connotations, various other colors which are woven into the fabric of India. That's very good. The important thing is that everybody must recognize that that different color, that rainbow, is also a part of India. The problems have arisen, and Mani really, in his history, was a little selective, because the most important thing, the biggest trauma which has affected us in the 20th century, was really that in 1947, a significant chunk of India broke away because they said, we don't want to be a part of this fabric. And that, to my mind, is something that has haunted us for a long time. And that haunting, that part of it, that people it is important to make people accept that you are a part of India.
Swapan,
And
we've run out of...
Can you deny? Mani loves the part that broke away. He's for permanent peace, he's for unending thing. He doesn't recognize that constitutes terrorism, etc. But the problem is that is a major issue. Why was Indian nationalism scuttled at the final hurdle? Because of this. And that, if you do not recognize that this reality is also staring us in the face,
Swapan,
Please let me answer that. It's the essence of the discussion. Because he's arrived at it, and fortunately he's brought me to it.
Yeah.
That's Pakistan.
Yeah, his favorite.
As a result of the Pakistan movement, which is a completely misconceived movement, and was in many ways a response to the movement for a Hindu India. It was a response for that. The idea of two nations comes from Savarkar. Jinnah arrived at it nearly 20 years later. The fact of the matter is that this misconceived motion has resulted in the small, in relative terms, Muslim community of Bharatvarsh being divided in three. It's the most disastrous consequence for this community. But it's the most disastrous consequence for this community. And unfortunately, because the politics of partition are sought to be reversed after the creation of two sovereign states called Pakistan and Bangladesh, in a revengeful attitude to what happened in 1947, there is being created in the Indian mind a salience between being a Muslim and being a Pakistani. And it is the exploitation of this psychological salience that causes ludicrous situations to arise, like Jahangir Pocha saying that I'd like to take this flat. The landlord says to him, you can take it, can you tell me what your name is? He says Jahangir, and the man says, no, I can't give it to you. Then he says, Jahangir Pocha, I'm a Parsi, and he says, sure, you can have it. This kind of salience between Pakistan and the Muslim mind, in order to have a revanchist position towards what happened inevitably in 1947, is responsible for creating this kind of Hindu chauvinism in India. And to solve it, the obvious way is to work with the Pakistanis. I have had the fortune of being born in Pakistan, of having lived in Pakistan as India's representative for 3 years, and in the last 35 years that I've been away, I've been back there 35 times, to the point that Swapan laughingly refers to Pakistan as my homeland. It is in a sense my homeland. And when I hear the only song that is sung in Pakistan more than their national anthem is Munni Barbad Hui Darling Tereli, I then see that there is such a strong emotional bond, a cultural bond, a civilizational bond between us and Pakistan, that I say it is suicidal to go on thinking of them as the enemy, and it is in the national interest to try to see whether we can effect a reconciliation.
Mani, if I may just intervene here because we've run out of time. I just, there are a couple
Mani,
of...
that's best of luck to you to try and discover the commonalities.
Swapan.
Meanwhile, let us at least preserve and protect our borders for the moment.
Okay, I just, this conversation hasn't even finished discussing India, so I don't want to get into Pakistan. But Swapan, you said something which I'd just like to highlight a few things before we end this session, is that you were speaking of Hindu heritage, inheritance, thousands and thousands of years old. When we find that we actually have a consonance and there is no contention on that, you came to 1947 and you brought up the wound of partition. And then you said it's very important to remind people that Muslims went over and there's a segment of people who said they don't want to live with this. I just want to at least put my point of view forward, that yes, there was a segment of people who didn't want to live within the parameters of, let's say, this Hindu inheritance or this civilizational inheritance. They went and formed another country. Good luck to them. There are 172 million Muslims who stayed in this country. And there is a man who we invited to Algebra, a man called Mufti Qayyum, who spent 12 years in jail, accused of being a terrorist, and he was exonerated by the Supreme Court. And when he came to the stage, he said, this is the country I love. It is better than any other country to be a Muslim in. And he said, it is not that we missed the train to Pakistan. We did not get on the train to Pakistan. And I think that's very important to remember when we're saying that that is why the BJP feels that we must remind Muslims that they have a Hindu heritage. They live here, they believe in this country, and they have faith in it. And I think it's not for any of us to remind them about it.
I think what you're saying is completely right. There are a large number of people who did not go to Pakistan. There are a large number of people who, living in Pakistan, who feel that they've created a monster of a state there. But it's important to remember that Pakistan was just not an ordinary breakaway. It was built on a certain philosophical foundation. And that philosophical foundation contests the basic idea of what we in India stand for. Therefore, just to say that we can go to Wagah, light a candle, and everything will be great after that, and we can be permanently peaceful, is not. Because they have decided that they belong somewhere else. They do not belong, that they do not have any truck with the Indian inheritance.
Sure, Swapan,
And that is very important to keep it in mind. I'm not saying I'm not saying that you should act on it, but just keep it in mind.
We are not going to have time for questions because we've really spilled over. I just want to, say one more thing. When you said that Pakistan was built on a certain philosophy, it was built, their idea of nationhood is a majoritarian idea of nationhood, it is a religious idea of nationhood, and it is precisely because India did not conceive of itself as a Hindu Rashtra and not as a majoritarian nation that we have survived.
Who says it's a Hindu Rashtra?
It's
a Hindu inheritance.
Your political spectrum does
not
want to declare it.
Again, my political spectrum, you know it far better than me, I presume. There is a belief in some quarters that India is a Hindu Rashtra, not India will be a Hindu Rashtra. There is a belief in certain things, whether you like it or not. India's fundamental identity is that of a Hindu. And that identity will remain, regardless of whether you accept it or not.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. This is such a contentious conversation. I'm really sorry because they are both eloquent combatants. We have really spilled over and we have another session, again discussing Hinduism, the idea of religious liberalism, fascinating ideas that Amish will be talking to us about. But this is an open-ended conversation, and with your permission, I would love to have Swapan and Mani back to discuss this because there is another concept. There is another concept that we haven't spoken about at all, which is why has the word secularism become such a compromised word, and that's not something we discussed. I'm sorry, time has run out. They're both going to be out for cocktails. Please continue the conversation with them, and by your leave, both of you, we'd love to have you back to continue this conversation. Thank you very much, Mani and Swap.